Hi, Artificial Fire Tiger, and I'm going to show you 5 tips in Ableton using the keyboard that can improve your workflow and speed up how you create stuff and optimize your creative processes. So the first trick that I'm going to show you is if we're working within a particular clip. For example, here's our clip and we want to focus the window a bit more onto it. We can press Z, which will zoom it in to that particular section, and then we can press X to go back to where we were. So if we're working on a smaller clip, for example, like this, we can do Z and we're zooming into that particular section. The second tip I'm going to show you is duplicating time. So if we've got some arrangements happening, so we've got a kick drum and we have some bass that's happening, and potentially we have recorded some snare pieces, and we've got an arrangement loop like so going on, and what we want to do is extend this out into extra pieces. All we have to do is highlight one of the loop points so that we get a selected time, and then on Windows you can press Control Shift and D, Command Shift D on a Mac, and then it will take everything above and below that particular section that we just selected and create a new section over here. So if we only wanted that one, for example, we could say, oh, we just want everything above and below there. Use the same, and it only takes those sections, so you can quickly build up timelines and arrangements using this approach. If you only wanted to do the kick drums into the next section, you can still use Control D, but it won't bring the stuff above or below. Next trick or tip is to use Control Shift dragging, and what I'll show you how that works inside an element. So if we have, for example, a sample in here, and let's just go zoom into this for a second, and this particular section, say we want this section to be at the beginning of the clip, what we can do is use Control Shift, which turns it into a little hand icon, and we can drag our WAV or wave file over to here, and that will shift within inside of this loop. It's an easy way to tidy up imports and pieces that you've brought in and get them aligned with the grid, for example. It uses the actual grid settings that you've got, so you can actually use Control Shift and Alt and you get more granularity, or you can move it in smaller increments and it's not snapping to the grid, otherwise it will snap to the grid. And speaking of grids, here's one final additional piece around those built-in shortcuts, is you can use Control 1 and it will increase your grid size. So we're currently on 1 and 128, and Control 2 will take out your grid size. So if we're saying, oh, okay, we need to work in 1/8 and we're doing this drag piece that I just showed you, it will now snap to 1/8 of a bar pieces. We can zoom it back in again, get more granularity and control using that technique like this. Okay, now for a couple of tips that we can use to improve our flow that aren't built-in shortcuts already existing in Ableton, so you can create any shortcuts that you want. One useful one is to take this record function here and then edit the key map that launches this. I will use R for this example, and what will happen now is when I press R, this will immediately start recording like so. So you can then enter your play whatever recording you want, and you can press R again to turn it back off again. It's useful jumping in to record quickly. You just press R on the keyboard and boom, you can start on your MIDI keyboard and start playing. The other one that's useful for mapping is the looping a clip. So for example, if you've got, let's just say, a loop that you're bringing in, let's take this loop and bring it in, for example, using our technique from before, Z, to zoom into the loop, see what we have, and say we just want to loop this particular section from this point onwards. One way to do this is to go in here and basically use Control E to slice it, and then we can use Control J that will consolidate this clip. Using Control J will put the endpoint markers in place for us, and then if we say for example delete this, and we then wanted to loop this section onwards, we'd have to hit this loop button here. But what we could do is map our keyboard macro, our key map to here, and select this and use L, for example, as our loop point. So let's just go back a minute and say we got this piece and we're working on it and we've sliced it and we messed around and we said, right, this is the loop point that we actually want. You'll see that the markers are now all over the place, but we're happy that this is the piece that we want. We can then go here, hit our Control J, which will then consolidate that entire piece, put the loop points where we want them or need them, and then we can hit highlight this and hit L, and because I went Control Z and unmapped my thing. Okay, I did this whole section again. Okay, another useful keyboard mapping to put in place is mapping the loop function in the clip. I'll show you what I mean. So if we bring in a loop, for example, like this, and say we're happy that this loop point is what we want, and we slice it with Control E, and we want to work with this piece, you'll see that the loop point is still over here somewhere. We can hit Control J, and that will consolidate that piece and put our endpoints to where we want, but we don't have a loop anymore. What's useful is to map this function to a key. So we can go here and do L, for example, which improves our flow a little bit. So if we were here, for example, and we had another loop that we said, right, we're happy with this, we can hit Control J to consolidate, and then we can hit L and we have our loop. We can then, we've zoomed out completely, and we can go back to our point here, and we've got our loop very quickly. I'll show you quickly again how that works. So we say here's our point we want to edit. We do our Control J here, which brings that into a loop, and we hit L here, and we then can just drag this section across here, and we've got this looping very quickly using keyboards and not really taking our hands off and having to mess around with all these different buttons. So I hope you've enjoyed those couple of tips around keyboard shortcuts that can improve your workflow. Please subscribe, and if you've got any comments or suggestions on other tips and tricks, please put them in the comments. I'll see you next time.